I thought it over for a bit before answering the question. That's a bit much to cover for 5 silver coins. But I'll do it specially for you, since Alan is the one who brought you in. First, you have to lower taxes. You want to get them down about 20 to 30% lower for all your merchants and farmers. What? But doesn't that mean less tax revenue? Fernie suddenly butt into the conversation with his own 2 cents. If you're just taxing them to the point they can barely get by, then that's all you're going to get. But what do you think happens when you lower taxes? You get less money from taxes. Fern gives his best impression of a broken record and says the same thing again. On the contrary, if taxes go down, you end up with a surplus on your hands. Farmers can use that extra bit of money they save to buy better tools like iron hoes or sharper scythes. Those improved tools mean farming becomes more efficient, and the farmers now end up with a surplus of time on their hands. They can use that time to do things like gathering edible plants from the mountains, make art or other handicrafts at home, and all sorts of things. They'll suddenly find themselves with much more free time on their hands. Well, that sounds great for the farmers. That just means less tax yields for the city though. This time, Phoebe was the one cutting in. I'm not finished yet. The taxes on the merchants should be lower at this point too, right? From what I've heard, it seems like territories have all sorts of taxes they charge merchants. Taxes for bringing goods in, sales tax for anything sold, and even a tax for taking merchandise out of the territory. But let's say you have one territory where the taxes are incredibly low compared to everywhere else. Which territory do you think a merchant on their way to the capital would want to go through? Though taxes may be lower by about 20%, what happens when you get twice the amount of merchants coming through? Or even 3 times that much? On the other hand, what would happen if taxes were higher than the other territories around it? Do you think they'd get more revenue from those taxes? That would make sales tax within that territory cheap as well. The people living there wouldn't only have more flexibility in their lives, but would have more buying power as well. Any merchant would love to sell their wares in a place like that, especially since they wouldn't have to pay any import or export taxes for anything they already sold off. The more they sell, the emptier their carts become, and you can't make money off an empty cart. They'd want to try replenishing some of their stock somehow, even if it means a smaller profit margin than bringing it in themselves. And then, oh, what's this? It seems like there's a ton of handicrafts these farmers made themselves. Buying these on the cheap means that I don't have to pay as much taxes on them either. You see what I'm getting at? The 3 of them just stared at me with their mouths open. What's up with them? Oh well. Anyway, I'd say I'd done enough to cover what they paid. Going the agriculture route isn't exactly the fastest way like you ask, but I guess this is enough to cover 5 silver coins, right? That's plenty. Just who is that girl? The waitress who works at a restaurant in town. The 3 guys were talking about Kaoru after making their way back to the castle. As of yet, governors may have thought about just how far they could raise taxes, but none had thought of lowering taxes on their citizens when they were already low enough for them to get by. It had always been said only the most talented of governors could find the exact amount to set taxes without pushing the people past their breaking point. That young girl had laughed off that way of thinking as if it were nothing. How could anyone have such knowledge and wisdom at an age like that? Of course, her suggestion was something that couldn't quite work in reality. Any plan to draw in merchants to a certain territory would just be pulling profits away from the other territories under the kingdom's control. The total tax revenue from all those territories would just go down from how much taxes were lowered, which meant less profits for the country. Not to mention that if anyone began siphoning profits from a neighboring territory, there was no doubt it'd lead to a flood of complaints and disputes. Her idea was more than enough for getting results as fast as possible though, just like Fabio had asked. Something like this had just never been taken into political consideration on a national level. She had to have a terrifying amount of talent to come up with that at age. I just noticed something, Fabio started. What's up? Fernand asked back. That girl was saying 5 silver coins would only get us that much and how agriculture wasn't the fastest way to go about it, right? So let's say we ask her to go over agriculture again but pay her even more, like, say, 5 small gold coins. What do you think she would tell us then? Whoa. It makes you want more of her, right? Yeah, definitely more, Alan chimed in. Wah. She's still just a young girl, Fernand chided. Not like that. Around that same time, the waitresses of the restaurant were busy raising a toast to Kaoru, with tea of course. They were, after all, getting 1 whole silver coin out of the deal. They rarely got much from tips from their commoner patrons. And working at a fairly cheap restaurant meant the waitresses had fairly meager wages to match, and here they were getting a silver coin each without even doing anything. It was safe to say they were grateful to Kaoru for that. Incredibly grateful. Even without cheats, this is easy peasy. Kaoru was feeling pretty full of herself. She was so full of herself, in fact, that she forgot the one small detail of having an adult's brain with modern-day knowledge while looking like a child was a pretty big cheat in and of itself. Chapter 5. Getting it all out there. He's back again, I muttered, furrowing my eyebrows. That Fernie guy Alan had brought in before had been showing up here more often lately. He'd always show up right when things were getting busy, calling me over to his table to ask me a whole bunch of questions out of nowhere. If he kept this up, my boss wasn't going to let me run my counseling service anymore. I mean, I was only supposed to do it during the off times when the crowd had thinned out. It wasn't like Amy and Agatha couldn't run the restaurant by themselves during rush hour. Alan knew the rules, so why not this guy? Right now. That troublesome customer was staring straight at me while slurping up a bowl of big and soft soup noodles. One of the dishes I got the restaurant to officially put on the menu, it's Sudan, by the way. His hair was a nice shade of blonde, and it was true he didn't look half bad. Still, my only thoughts on him were as follows. What a creep. Prince Fernand had become very interested in Kaoru, and would frequently come to the restaurant to watch her work. It wasn't like he was the king yet, so as long as he didn't slack off too much and let work pile up, it wasn't like he had much to do in the first place. For some reason, Fernand wouldn't invite Fabio along, having snuck out to the restaurant all alone, and Alan had gone back to his hometown the other day, meaning he was out of the picture for now. While it wasn't as if Fernand was completely ignorant to the ways of the world, the concept of not bothering other people was foreign to him. Being the prince, there was no one around him who had work that took priority over him after all. It was because of this fact that he simply forgot about why Alan had taken them to the restaurant way past the lunch rush. Despite how Alan specifically mentioned only going after the last order was called and the waitresses had less work to deal with. People were meant to work themselves around his schedule. To Fernand, that was just common sense, and that was exactly why he committed faux pas after faux pas. He would call for Kaoru when the restaurant was packed. Even when Kaoru had other people reserved her for counseling, he would push his way ahead of them so he could see her first. His questions began heading into territory that Kaoru didn't want to talk about, like how he started asking her for more personal information. At first, Kaoru had made sure to handle it as well as any person would. He was a friend of Alan's after all, so she put up with him somewhat. She diligently answered all his questions on political policies for the country, even though she couldn't tell if he was testing or messing with her. But Fernand's questions and actions began escalating over time, getting to the point where Kaoru couldn't even answer them anymore. He was even beginning to cause trouble for the other customers as well. There was a limit to these sorts of things. It was true he paid well, but the way he was going about it made it seem like he was saying Kaoru would do anything as long as he gave her money for it, and that attitude was ticking her off. Even when he threw in a gold coin to show off, it only made her be even more on guard. Finally, Kaoru went to her boss to ask him for a favor. The manager and the other employees already knew Kaoru was having trouble with Fernand, which was how she received permission to say 2 specific replies to him. I'm sorry, but I can no longer be your waitress, Bernie. If you need to order anything, please ask one of the other staff. The next day, Fernand went out of his way to ignore the fact that Agatha was right near him and call Kaoru over, and such was her response. It was practically written on the other customers' faces that they were wondering when this was going to happen. A blank expression hung on Fernand's face as if he couldn't come to terms with what he'd just heard before suddenly flying off the handle. What are you saying? Why not? I already told you why, didn't I? Kaoru began answering coolly. Over and over again at that. You're causing trouble for the other customers and I've had enough. Someone else will be in charge of taking your orders from now on, and I won't be taking any more of your requests for counseling either. Fernand's legs almost gave out when Kaoru glared at him. Granted, most normal people would tremble in fear if Kaoru truly put everything into glaring at them, especially since she already had that harsh look in her eyes to begin with. But I'm a paying customer. You can't do that to The manager told me he'd be fine without your business if you tried getting involved with me any further. The other customers murmured their surprise that even the owner of the restaurant had gone this far. What are you? The only ones who had told Fernand no to one of his requests were his parents and his two friends. A bubbling anger built up inside him at being denied until it swallowed him completely. He suddenly grabbed her arm and yanked her toward him. Come with me. Ow. Stop it. Fernand was trying to drag Kaoru away from the restaurant as she struggled against him. A girl like you doesn't belong here. You're coming back with me. Amy and Agatha came running over to stand in front of him, and the other customers got up as well to block his path. The owner and the chefs also came sprinting out of the kitchen to stop him. Get out of the way. Do you have any idea who I? He stopped halfway through his sentence, suddenly coming to terms with the cold stares fixed solely on him. That, combined with the look of disgust in Kaoru's eyes, caused him to lose the ability to speak. His head rapidly cooled off, and regret began building up inside him. What was I doing here? Was I really about to let slip the fact that I'm royalty? Fernand let go of Kaoru's arm, then silently left the restaurant. I'm sorry for causing so much trouble, everyone. Kaoru looked absolutely crestfallen as she apologized. But the customers around her immediately tried cheering her up, telling her, it's not your fault at all, Kaoru, and we'll be here to protect you anytime you need it, so don't worry about it. A mug of ale on the house to everyone who stood in that guy's way to protect Kaoru. Cheers erupted inside the restaurant at the owner's words, since every single customer there had stood up for her. It had been 3 weeks since that incident. I hadn't seen Fernie back at the restaurant since then, and I spend my days in relative peace. Everyone at my workplace and all the customers had been really good to me, and I took a day off every 10 days to go to the library to study up on where I was. Thanks to that, I'd gotten a pretty good grasp on everything I needed to know about this world, or this continent, I should say. I knew everything from the countries around me, and even their political climates. Just like what Charles had told me back when first was hitching a ride with him and his dad, the kingdom of Brancott was located at the base of a peninsula that stuck out to the west. The country was surrounded by oceans to the north and south, and by 4 other countries to the west and east. The political situation here was relatively stable compared to the other countries. And, along with the kingdom of Belmore to the north, Brancott was said to be a country that was very easy to live in. I'd say Sally's ended up dropping me off in a pretty good place, considering it was her. As I was thinking all this over while sweeping around the entrance to the shop, a super fancy carriage came up and parked itself right in front of the restaurant. You, girl. Would this be the Big Belly Bistro? An arrogant-sounding voice called out to me from the open window of the coach. That's right, I almost forgot how generic-sounding this place's name is. Oh, yes, it is. Even if I wanted to snuff him, nothing good would come of going against a noble, but I'd still go against them if I needed to, of course. Then would a girl by the name of Kaoru be here? Why yes, that would be me. Sirens were blaring in my head, telling me nothing about this was good. What? With a shout, the man speaking stuck his face out the window. You're telling me that Kaoru is this little girl? Well, excuse me for being little. Everything about the haughty, chubby man practically screamed aristocrat. He looked me up and down for a few seconds before sticking something that looked like a letter out the window of the coach. Don't be so lazy about it, man. Take it. I didn't say a word as I reached out and grabbed the letter from him. I couldn't really just ignore him at this point after all. At the same time, someone stepped down from the other side of the coach and placed a decently sized trunk down on the side of the road. The window to the carriage closed and the person who set the box down got back in before the cart trundled away without anyone explaining a thing to me. The heck is this? I didn't know what it was, but I did know I had a bad feeling about it. And somehow, I didn't think I was going to be wrong about that. I hadn't touched the box at all, by the way. I mean, the guy hadn't said anything to me about it, and he'd left it in front of the hardware store right by us instead of the restaurant. That was probably a delivery for someone else, that's all. I'd just be a thief if I tried touching it, so touch I shan't. No one said anything to me about it, and it was even delivered to a completely different place, so it didn't have anything to do with me. Nope, nothing at all. After going back into the shop, I waited a little bit before checking again, only to find that the box was already gone. Yep, looks like whoever that was supposed to be delivered to picked up their stuff. Alright, let's move on to the problem at hand. The letter. I opened the envelope with a great trepidation, and inside I found a single sheet of paper. It was an invitation to a party being held at the Royal Palace next week. Alright, looks like my hunch was right on the money. I wasn't happy about that at all though. Viscount Alaman wasn't in a good mood. He'd been entrusted with delivering an invitation for the prince's party being held next week, which was a good thing. This wasn't an invitation that had been made en masse to be sent to the other party guests, but something given to him directly from the prince. This was something to be ecstatic about. The recipient was probably someone the prince's heart was set on. He'd thought there must be some good fortune waiting for him at being made the bearer of such happy news. But the moment he thought that, he made the woeful discovery that the invitation was addressed to a commoner. The prince is using me, a viscount, as an errand boy for some commoner. He almost fainted from the humiliation. Not only was he being made to deliver this commoner's invitation, but a trunk with a dress, shoes, and a handwritten letter from the prince himself. Was this girl his secret lover or something? Was he planning on revealing her in front of everyone at the party? He may be able to use that information to his advantage, is what Alaman thought, but it turned out the recipient was just a child. She did have good features, but the look in her eyes was awful, make other children cry, awful. There was no feasible way she could be his lover. All Alaman could wonder was what sort of cruel juke this was. He had a job to deliver the prince's letter personally, so he made sure to hold the farthest corner of the invitation as he handed it through the window of his coach so he wouldn't have to risk being touched by a commoner. There was no need for him to hand over the box with the dress and shoes in it himself, so he made the attendant with him set it down. After finishing his unpleasant task, he immediately left for home. Oh, what a truly horrible day this was. Doesn't look like I can wiggle my way out of this one. I'd ignored that box from earlier on purpose, and it wasn't like I didn't have my hunches over what that invitation could be about. It was true I wanted someone here who would support me, but not like this. I already had tons of food packed away in my item box, as well as all the money I'd saved up from my job. I learned my lesson from last time and made sure to stock up on plenty of water too. Potions just didn't do the trick when it came to washing your face, or that's the feeling I got, at least. Alright then. Time to prepare myself for the worst. 6 days later, I had the manager and all my coworkers gathered together after telling them I had something important to talk about. I came clean and told them how some higher-up had singled me out and summoned for me tomorrow. I didn't tell them about how they called me to the palace or anything, but I figured I should at least give them a heads up so it didn't come back to bite me later. Everyone was shocked and even recommended I run away right now if I didn't like it, but I laughed it off and told them I would be fine. Amy and Agatha were crying and clinging to me, but that wasn't because they'd be losing their other source of income, right? Sorry about that, girls. Everyone else there was sad over me leaving as well. The past few months had been relatively peaceful, and I'd managed to get a grasp on this country's culture, economy, and almost everything else you could want to know. Now would have been just the right time for me to look for a place to begin settling down if this hadn't happened. This town could have been where I started my new life proper, but it didn't look like that was going to happen anymore. I would work lunchtime as normal tomorrow, then leave the restaurant for good right after. I couldn't just run away now. I was going to the palace. Just watch. I'd make sure to put an end to this, and in a way where they weren't going to send people chasing after me again. The time was evening, and the place was the main entrance to the castle. "Excuse me," a single noble girl called out to the guard standing at the gate. "I received an invitation for the party, so may I go through?" The guard was taken aback by her words. He knew there was a party being held today, and he knew of the droves of nobles who were invited as well. But if she was supposed to be nobility, normally she should have arrived with the rest of her family in a carriage bearing their family crest. At the very least, a noble's daughter would never come walking up to a party. Ever. Though it was obvious she didn't exactly look like the type of person to be invited to a party at the palace, she was wearing a dress no commoner would be able to get their hands on. Most importantly of all, she had an invitation. If he were to turn away the daughter of an aristocrat who was actually invited, heads would roll, more specifically, his. And that wasn't a figure of speech. Those eyes. They were the eyes of someone who was used to tormenting those below her. She had to be the wicked daughter of some aristocrat's family, no doubt about it. This wasn't a girl to be trifled with. The girl gave the guard a slight bow before heading through the gate. Kaoru slipped in with the other guests pouring into the castle, wandering around to find a room to be in. She finally found herself a dressing room, filled with older and younger women alike fixing their dresses, tightening their corsages, redoing their makeup. It was pretty much an all-purpose room for girls here. She took off her hand-me-down from the Baron's daughter that she'd snuck off with during her escape a while back before changing into her maid outfit, also taken from the Baron's mansion. Who would have thought the daughter's old clothes would come in handy so much? After she finished changing, Kaoru quietly left the room before finding an older maid with an air of dignity about her. Excuse me. I was told to head where the party is." The woman turned around, looking Kaoru over with bloodshot eyes. "Great, some backup from one of the other noble families. Do you have any experience serving drinks? Do you think you can hold about 5 or 6 glasses on a tray and walk around the room?" Though Kaoru couldn't help but notice how scary the woman's eyes were, she decided she wasn't exactly one to talk. "Why yes, I've had some experience as a waitress." "All right, then you'll be a great help. Go into that room over there and find some clothes you can change into. After, head out to the party and circle around out there. If the supervisor out on the floor tells you anything different, follow their directions instead. Now hurry." "Oh, all right." Swept along at the woman's urging, Kaoru dashed off to get changed.